Okay, one thing we haven't done yet is to look at the XML syntax behind a business rule. So I'm going to take our directory name and I'm going to run the export wizard. So we go to BizTalk Server 2006 and look for the business rule engine deployment wizard. Now, one reason you can use this is to move your business rule and or vocabulary from, for instance, your test system to your QA or production system. And we'll have an entire separate chapter module discussion on that later. But I want to show you what your business rule looks like. So we're going to say export policy or vocabulary to a file from the database. And here it just gives you your local server name or whatever your SQL that BizTalk is attached to. Usually you just default that. And then here, let's pick a policy. So here it's going to show you, I think, only your deployed policies. So we pick 1.3, and then we go to that directory, and we'll call this export policy, and I'll put _1_3.xml. And that utility runs. It says 0 errors. We click next. And if you want to run the wizard again, rather than doing finish and going to start programs, there's a nice little checkbox here. If you click finish now, it just basically loops back to the first page, and you can run it again, which is kind of cool. Now this time let's export our vocabulary. So when you get to this page, instead of clicking policy, which is the default, click vocabulary, and then the list here will include the vocabs. You click that, you put your directory name, and we'll call this loan demo 14.xml. And again, this is actually the batch syntax. You could run, let's see, I think you can run this in, no, I don't think they provided the batch utility for this. This is what's kind of strange. So now you run that again, you're done, and we're finished. So now you see in our directory here we have these two files. Let's look at the vocabulary first. So first of all, the file, the root element is BRL, Business Rule Language probably. And you can see the namespace. You have a vocabulary ID, so everything has a GUID assigned to it. The name is Loan Demo. It's a major version 1, minor version 4. And this is the person who last created it, which is me. And the date and time. Then you have your vocabulary definition. Here is the name of a field called a Loan App Customer ID. And then here is your XPath to find that. And then it tells you what document, what schema it comes from, which as long as we're on this machine, it has the disk path. But of course on another machine you may not have that, which by the way, if you're going to let people run your business rule composer on your production system, which is probably not a good idea, you would have to have your schemas in the XSD format on your production system. So you'd have to make a separate deployment step just to move the XSDs to production. Okay, then we have another definition here called minimum time in current residence. And you can see here it's a database binding field. So it actually here has the name of the database server, Northwind. And this would be an interesting question then here is if your production server, obviously it's not going to be called BizTalk D31, it's going to be like prod Northwind. So you would need some way here to rebuild your database server names or somehow pass the connection string into your rules. Okay. Let's see what else we have. Here's the months in current residence, and again that's just an XML field, type integer. And then we scroll on down. This is our set versus our get. And so it's still the same XPath here. And then we have our credit card balance, which is also a database field name. And last one is the database customer ID, which again is a database field. Okay, so now let's go look at the other file, which was the policy. It's also a BRL file, and you have here a rule set instead of vocabulary, similar information. You have a fact retriever here, first of all, between here and here. And notice it says myFactRetriever.dbFactRetriever. So what that tells us is that I think in our C# project here they had a fact retriever that we haven't looked at yet. So if we go back to our directory, our SDK, you can see here is a folder called myFactRetriever, and they have this solution here which we haven't looked at. So let's take a quick look at that. So what you have here is a class which implements an interface called implements another class called iFactRetriever, and then it also implements this interface. So actually, sorry, these are both interfaces. It implements two interfaces. So that means it has to have, I believe, an update fax and update fax after execution. And so what you basically see here is here's your database connection string. So they've actually hard-coded, in a way, the connection string here in this C# program. And then this is the important line. It says engine assert DC data connection. And so that data connection is inserted as a fact into the rule engine, and then when you try to retrieve data from the database, that data can be retrieved. And I think that's why I had the problem earlier where my vocabulary didn't work, because I didn't supply a fact retriever for that. Okay, so we were looking at the XML file here of the exported policy, and we discovered the fact retriever. Now if we continue on down, we have bindings, and you see here's your schema again. And then here you see a class reference to BRE helpers. That's my library, my BizTalk Training Common Library that I created. And it tells you the DLL where it's at, the Windows Assembly GAC information there. And then here we have some data rows. And then we have let's see, a selector here. So this is an XPath going down to the place of residence. And you have another one here called the processor case. And if you keep looking at this, you'll see the ands and the ors and the compares and all that kind of thing. So like, okay, here's our first rule, and here you can see an if statement. So it says employee status rule. Here's your if, and now you can see why the ands and ors maybe are kind of in this logical XML tree shape format. We have a greater than or equal to, and that's going to have two things coming into it, a vocabulary and then a actual field called time in months. And then it's going to be comparing that to the integer 15. So LHS is probably left-hand side and RHS is right-hand side. So the right-hand side is equal to the constant 15 and the left-hand side is equal to this XPath. And then it's going to compare the two, and if it's true, then you have your functions or your actions right here. So in this case, it's probably going to take this field here, employee status, and it's going to assign it a value of employee status is valid. And then basically you'll see the same thing over and over. There's another rule. It's got a left hand, right hand side. Here's another rule. And if we look at, I was trying to remember if we had one that had all the ands and ors on it, but I think we've taken that out. So just scroll down to the bottom here. It's really just the same stuff repeats over and over at this point. So now you've had a look at the exports of the export policy and the export vocabulary.